This is Data Source Consulting, an EXL company, and you are attending our educational webinar series. Today's content is around healthcare provider MDM. And the reason why we selected this topic is healthcare is one of our largest verticals, and we are finding in conversations with our clients that either they are thinking about mastering their provider data or they are in the midst of it, and it's complex and it's challenging, especially for those clients that have done numerous acquisitions and whatnot. So we decided that, you know, in the spirit of sharing our information and our learnings with our audience, this would be an appropriate topic. So welcome. We are going to be hosted by Bryson Dunn. But before we introduce Bryson, let me share a little bit about Data Source Consulting. We are a consulting firm that focuses exclusively on enterprise data management, modern data warehousing and architectures, and decision intelligence. And we do that through two different streams. One of those is strategic work, where we do data governance strategy, which includes people, process, and technology. We build roadmaps and blueprints and assessments. We do program management for very highly complex efforts where you've got numerous vendors and numerous solutions in progress, such as a digital transformation. We do project plans, data environment evaluations, health checks, and vendor tool selections. So that's our strategy arm. Now, under our implementation arms, this is really where we lock arms with your internal team. And that would include data architects, data integrators, data quality, master data management, reporting and analytics, cloud and hybrid cloud types of solutions, big data, and business intelligence. So that's our implementation arm. And one of the really nice things that happened in 2016 is that we were acquired and partnered with EXL Analytics, now our parent company. And so now we also are industry aligned with KPIs and deliver predictive modeling, machine learning, and robotics. So now we can offer the complete end-to-end solution when it comes to enterprise data management and analytics. Okay. With that, let me go ahead and introduce your presenter. Today we are going to be joined by our Competency Director for Master Data Management, Bryson. And Bryson is, you know, you'll enjoy this presentation because he's got a very unique perspective, and he likes to challenge his customers and work with them together to implement and innovate solutions that are right-sized for what they need. He's got extensive business background. Previously, he was a solutions architect, and he's a full-stack developer. So here you have someone in the competency lead role that's been there and done that, right? He's rolled up his sleeves, done the work himself. He's led teams to do it and hired and developed teams to deliver on these types of robust solutions. So we're very excited about that. And my name is Deborah Langer. I'll be your host. I have more than 15 years experience in enterprise technology services, and very excited to have you all join us today. My main goal is to make sure that things go smoothly for our presentation today. So with that, let me turn it over to Bryson.
The webinar today. Appreciate the opportunity to discuss this with you. The first thing that we wanted to review today is what the challenge is. Why is managing provider data so difficult, right? And I think it really boils down to the frequency at which this data changes. According to healthdatamanagement.com, demographics for your providers will change typically 2% each month. And every year, affiliations of your providers will change 20 to 30%, and their status will change about 5% per year. And by status change, we mean, you know, the provider may no longer be practicing, or may have deceased, or may have started practicing. So, you know, in real numbers for a modest health plan with 500,000 providers, that means that every month you have 10,000 of your providers that change their demographic data, meaning their phone number, address, email address, maybe name or locations. And you have 150,000 changes in affiliations and status every year. So, you know, when you average that out per day, that's 740 changes every day that you need to keep up with in order to keep your data set accurate. So it's no surprise that CMS found a number of data quality issues in their 2018 report. The CMS has released reviews of health plan provider directories, the online provider directories of health plans for the last 2 years. The most recent report came out this January, and in that report, 64 health plans or payers were reviewed. 55% of the provider records that they reviewed, which was not the full data set, it was a sample, but 55% were found to have some form of inaccuracy. And 46% almost were found to have, or locations that were reviewed. Of course, a provider can have multiple locations. 46% of those locations had an error that was significant enough to represent a barrier to care in their view, meaning the members might not have an ability to contact the provider, or they may be listed as seeing new patients when they're not. So overall, 52 of the 64 health plans reviewed were out of compliance. That's a huge number. Some of the compliance actions were less severe, some were more severe. 3 of the reviewed payers received a warning letter and a request for a business plan. But you can see that clearly managing provider data is a difficult feat. So let's talk for a minute about some of the pain points. What are the issues that can result from poor provider data quality? We have a list of the most, I think, common and impactful use cases that inaccurate provider data can impact. And the first of those is claims management. So if you are trying to process a claim that has missing or inaccurate provider data, it could very well cause a delay or failure to process payment. And that means that your members will be calling in more frequently, and your providers will be calling in more frequently to understand the status of that claim. So your call centers will have increased volume, and your adjudication team may also need to go through more manual steps in terms of verifying that provider data to process the claim. So claims management can certainly be impacted. Referrals and credentialing, I think, are related in that they both impact member and provider retention and satisfaction. With referrals specifically, if a member needs to be referred to a specialist for whatever condition that they may be dealing with, and they're unable to locate a provider in their area, that can be an issue certainly for the satisfaction of the member, but it also may drive them to go out of network. So referrals can certainly be an issue, and credentialing can also be a problem. If you're unable to collect provider data and evaluate their credentials efficiently, it could cause a delay in when that provider can begin seeing patients, again, impacting provider and member satisfaction. The provider directory is, I think, one of the most important aspects of this data quality problem. And we touched on it on the previous slide, but often this data set is the most member-facing data that a health plan will have and maintain and manage. And having inaccuracies in that data set directly impacts member ability to access care, particularly in-network care, because if they're unable to locate providers, they may go out of network, which increase costs. And of course, as we learned on the previous slide, the CMS will fine you potentially for having poor data quality. So the provider directory is crucially important. Program integrity can also be impacted. Provider data often supports internal and external audits to ensure program integrity. And when that data is inaccurate, again, it's a more lengthy and labor-intensive process, and the effectiveness of those audits can be impacted. Lastly, care coordination is another area where poor provider data quality can have a negative impact. If you're unable to exchange data via email or contact different members of a care team over phone, for example, that can increase costs of care overall. We've worked with a number of health plans and had conversations with some of these organizations and discussed this provider data quality issue in particular. The fortunate thing is that most of these organizations recognize that it's an issue, that data quality, poor provider data quality is a problem. It's having an impact on the business and it needs to be solved. So that's positive. What we have found, however, is that there's a pretty consistent pattern in how some of these organizations try to solve the problem. And what we found is that some combination of scripted routines and outreach is often applied to produce accurate data. And not to say that there's anything wrong with this approach, scripted routines and outreach, but it does leave some gaps with this problem in particular. Obviously, if you view this as a one-time activity, that there is an end point or a milestone at which the data set will be clean and further action isn't needed, that's going to be an issue long term because of the frequency with which this data set changes. So, that is something to avoid. But more holistically, what this approach lacks is a path to keeping the data clean in a rapidly changing environment. And that environment could be internal. New applications could be spun up, old applications could be retired, or there may be some consolidation within your internal landscape. And there could be new external sources of data that you want to take advantage of. For example, CAQH, or you may purchase LexisNexis or IMS data, for example. So being flexible and being able to adapt to these changes is a key to success in our view. One of the ways that you can address some of those shortcomings in a more traditional approach is to apply the principles of master data management. And that's what this whole series or this whole webinar is about. And before we dive into the specifics, we need to understand what that is. What is MDM? So master data, the data that's managed by MDM, are essentially the consistent and uniform identifiers and attributes that describe core entities to the business of an organization. And often when we think of master data or we speak about master data, we categorize them into domains. And those domains can be provider, the domain that we're speaking about today. It could be customers, vendors, locations, reference data. But specifically to the healthcare space, some of those typical domains are, members, policies, locations, product, clinical data. So it's different for every business which domains are most important to them, but it's a helpful way to describe the master data that is being managed. Another key to master data management, to understanding master data management, is that master data is sourced from your operational system. So you will have different applications across your IT landscape that will have some portion of information of the master data, but that data can often have differing formats, structures, or even conflicting values. So, for example, your claims adjudication system may have a certain portion of provider data that is received through the claims process, and your online provider directory system may have a conflicting value for that or no value for that at all, and it may be in a different structure, just as an example. So master data management, obviously, being able to manage master data is often viewed as a technology, right? There are software vendors in the marketplace that make tools available to more easily manage master data, and these tools are wonderful. But when we approach master data management at Data Source, we think of it as a technology-enabled discipline. Technology is great and it can be a wonderful tool to manage master data, but first and foremost, master data management is a discipline. It's a collaboration between business and IT to ensure uniformity, accuracy, stewardship, consistency, and accountability, making sure that there are processes and standards in place to manage this data. And that might sound a lot like data governance. That's because it is. So at the end of the day, master data management, the outcomes of a successful master data management program will improve your data quality, integration, and synchronization. So you will have higher quality data. That's the focus of this webinar, of this session. But you'll also be able to integrate and synchronize the data more efficiently because you'll have linkages to all of your operational applications at the end of the day. And we'll talk about exactly why that is. But MDM at the end of the day addresses challenges of data duplication, lack of standardization, and an inability to integrate similar data from different sources. Those could be internal sources or external sources. So that's master data management. Implementing MDM for the provider domain comes with a number of advantages. I think the most important advantage is to establish a single central version of the truth that is trusted and consolidates multiple disparate sources into a single location. And through that process, you can automatically resolve certain data quality issues by applying rules. Gaps in your records could be filled through the consolidation process. And what's meant by that is that certain systems may have missing values that other systems can provide, filling in those gaps. And you can also easily enrich the data via third-party sources, multiple third-party sources in a fairly straightforward fashion. You can process timely updates from all of your sources, making sure that you get the best of the best and the latest updates from internal and external sources. And it establishes a platform for efficient outreach. And what's meant by that is that frequently MDM tools will expose a user interface that is tailored for data stewardship. So you can leverage that capability and expose it to your outreach team or to your credentialing team and use it as an interface for those teams to manage that data. And what it does is provides them insight into where all the data is coming from, where it's stored, from a lineage perspective. What are some of the data quality issues or conflicting values that may exist? And it provides them the means to update that data in a central location with tailored user interface and user experience. So that can often be highly valuable. And overall, it provides accurate and consistent reporting, enhanced care coordination, and improved member satisfaction and retention, essentially addressing all of the pain points that were reviewed on the previous slide in terms of the various use cases that inaccurate provider data can impact. So there are a number of keys to successfully implementing a provider MDM solution. And so we want to share those with you today. The first one is keeping a process focus. And we'll recommend this with the implementation of any MDM domain, but particularly with the provider domain, we think it's as important, if not more important, to focus on the different business processes that consume and maintain provider data to build a solution, a technical solution in support of those processes. So, often the only source of authoritative data is the provider itself. So outreach is unavoidable. So that's the first process, right? Being able to understand what that outreach process looks like, what are the questions that those people will ask of the provider, what are the data elements that need to be maintained as a part of that process is key. The other processes that we recommend on dialing in on or architecting a solution to support are the onboarding or credentialing process and the deactivation process as well. And keeping a process focus really comes back down to our philosophy of MDM as a technology-enabled discipline. So this is the discipline part of it, right? Establishing processes and procedures to maintain the data and supplying the tools, the master data management solution in support of them. The second point is integrated consolidation. So again, this is a typical part of any MDM project, but there's a little bit of a particular flavor or spin when you're talking about provider MDM. First of all, you need to understand the trustworthiness of your data sources. Third-party sources exist, and the quality of that data could vary pretty significantly. For example, some of the CMS data is notoriously out of date. But you need to understand how that external data links to your internal systems for operational purposes. It's not enough just to have access to a third-party data source. You need to be able to take the best of the attributes, the highest trusted values from that data set, integrate it with your internal data set, and be able to consume it in your IT landscape. So that's also very important. Data quality and stewardship, again, critically important here as well as with any MDM project, but you need the ability to cleanse, standardize, and validate the data, which will not only improve the quality of the data, but also the accuracy of the consolidation process. And you need the team's processes and workflows to ensure a consistent management of the data. So that goes back to the process focus. So you need an outreach team. You need a team identified that manages the onboarding process and the deactivation process. And often these teams will already be defined, but as a part of the master data management implementation process, you may need to redefine those processes and establish technical workflows to guide users through those processes. And lastly, on that point, you need robust stewardship tools that will improve the accuracy of those updates of those processes and the efficiency of those processes, giving them access to all of those high quality trusted data sources and the ability to insight into lineage, the updates of that data over time, and of course the ability to maintain those data elements. Lastly, you need to be able to quantify the impact that the MDM solution is having on this issue. Ultimately, you need to demonstrate the ROI and the justification for MDM. And the way you do that is you track the quality of the data, establishing KPIs and metrics and tracking the change of those metrics over time, and also tracking the improvement of the effectiveness of those processes, whether it be credentialing or outreach or deactivation, and also improving those processes through analytics. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So now that we understand a little bit more about what MDM is, how to successfully apply or implement MDM for the provider domain, I wanted to peel back the onion and give you some insight into some of the key aspects of the solution, of what a provider solution would look like. And the first aspect of that is how the data is structured and managed within an MDM system. And this is referred to as a golden record. You might have heard that term if you've spoken to somebody familiar with MDM. And a golden record is really, in some respects, the heart and soul of an MDM solution. So firstly, I wanted to walk you through the different components of a golden record. And in my mind, there are three. The first is source records, our source records. And so in this example, you can see that we have three provider records, each coming from a different system. Of course, we track the internal identifiers of that record within the system. And then you can see the different attributes that describe the provider record itself, which is me, Dr. Bryson Dunn. And I'm not a doctor. I'll put that disclaimer out there. But you can see that we have conflicting values for the name, conflicting values for the taxonomy code, and some gaps in the information as well. So the first step of producing a golden record is to have access to your source records. And you also hear these referred to as cross-references. Now the second step, and you can see I've added a row there for the golden record, but the second step is I break it down into three substeps. The first is matching. So we need the ability to identify that these 3 records are the same provider. And this is an area that a number of software vendors or MDM tools, they will provide different algorithms, different means for identifying duplication within a data set. And those could use fuzzy logic is what we refer to it as, probabilistic rules that could leverage string distance or phonetic or proprietary algorithms. It could be exact matching on phone number in this example. But one way or another, you need the ability to identify that these records are the same. The second step in this component of a golden record is the survivorship process. So you need the ability to select the best of breed or the best version of the truth for that golden record amongst many potentially conflicting values. So for the name attribute, we might say that we trust the value from the CMS the most, but for taxonomy code, we want to use the value that's coming in from our credentialing system. And again, this is an area where different tools will have different approaches for calculating survivorship, but one way or another, you need to identify what those attributes on the golden record will be. And that brings us to the third step, what I call merging. That's actually persisting in a record or the golden record in the MDM system that represents that best version of the truth. And you'll see that we identify it with an MDM ID that can be used to uniquely identify that particular provider across the landscape. And again, it persists and represents that single version of the truth for your consolidated provider data. So that is the golden record, but there's a third step to this process that I think is probably the most important, and that is the ability to, for a human being to look at this data set and recognize that we have conflicting values here. And in the process of credentialing or outreach, I might come to know that the name for this person is actually Carrie Bryson Dunn and not Dr. Carrie Dunn. And the taxonomy code might be incorrect. So we need the ability to update and steward this data, and that is the last and I think most critical component of a golden record. Another key component of a successful MDM solution, an effective solution for managing provider data, is data governance. So there is a subtle delineation between master data management and data governance. I would say data governance is a part of any successful MDM program. And you can view the relationship between the two as master data management being more technical and structural in nature, providing feedback and metrics, user interfaces and workflows, that consolidation platform for the data. And you can view data governance, the data governance component of MDM, as represented by the business data owners, the business data stewards, who provide guidance in how that data should be structured or managed, the business rules for validating or standardizing that data. And they're the team that are responsible for monitoring and resolution. So that interplay between data governance and master data management, again, often they're viewed as one and the same, which is true, but the point here is that both that technical component of the solution and that business component of the solution are both crucially important for success. So what does the day in the life of a data steward look like? Well, there are a number of activities that are very common for an MDM data steward. The first is merged record management, and that would be the process of manually merging and unmerging records. So in the case of merging, your matching algorithm may have missed a match, and you want to manually consolidate 2 records. So that's one example. And in the unmerging use case, your matching algorithm may have accidentally merged 2 records together that do not belong together, that are not the same. And so you need the ability to manually unmerge those records as well. So those are two common activities. Another one would be a review of low confidence matches. So very frequently, as a part of configuring or implementing your consolidation process, you will define rules for matching. And you may have certain rules that are low confidence, or certain scores that below a certain threshold, you want a human to review those matches. And so another extremely common activity for an MDM data steward would be to review those low confidence matches to make a decision one way or another, to say that yes, this is a match, or no, it's not. Another one would be management of golden record attributes, that single version of the truth that we described in the previous slide. And an interesting one that is also very common is to maintain data elements that MDM is the system of record for. And what we mean by that is that there are certain data elements or attributes or structures within MDM that aren't managed elsewhere within the organization. So MDM is really the only place that they're managed. And for example, that could be a hierarchy, parent-child relationships between different providers, or even just sibling relationships between providers. Different ways to classify or segment the data, and other extended attributes, again, that aren't managed elsewhere. So maintaining those different data elements is another activity. And lastly, another, and again, very common activity here for MDM data stewards is to review and remediate data quality issues. So as a part of your normal data processing activities, which could be done in real time or in batch, a number of data quality issues will be flagged and identified that need to be reviewed by a person. And so, another very common activity for an MDM data steward is to review those data quality issues and correct that data. That data could be corrected within MDM itself or within source applications, and that really depends on the architecture, right? How MDM is implemented and how it fits into your IT landscape. So on the subject of data quality, I did want to briefly touch on the data quality management process. This is standard, or this is our approach, the data source approach to managing data quality. And you can see that it's a continuous cycle. It's an iterative process. The first step is to profile the data, understanding the different sources and the quality and patterns of those different sources. The second step is to define data quality rules. These could be rules to automatically cleanse and standardize data, and it could be rules to identify invalid data that might need review. The third step is to implement those rules and apply them. The fourth step is to monitor the execution of those rules. And relating to that last step we just talked about in the MDM data steward slide, you need to take corrective action on rules that do require human intervention. But today I did want to focus in on one of those steps in particular. That's step 4, the monitoring step. This goes back to one of those keys to success in implementing MDM for the provider domain. You need the ability to track and measure the improvement over time, and that's also a key aspect of this portion of the data quality management process. So you need the ability to provide a snapshot into the health of your data at any given point in time, and be able to see trends of how those different metrics and KPIs are improving or being negatively impacted over time. And this will give you insight into, if your rules are effective, or if the rules need to be updated, or new rules need to be created to continuously improve the quality of your data. One of the ways you can do that is through the creation of scorecards with metrics in them. And again, this is where data quality tools can often be extremely valuable. And you can also create things like automated notifications that are sent when certain rules or metrics fall below or above different thresholds that you defined. So monitoring data quality and the health of your system operationally is crucial. And as an example, some of the common reports that will come out of that monitoring process could be automated exports of different data elements, different data sets like your scorecards or your data profiles, or even the drill down data. So, example, the data that's underneath or supporting the scorecards and profiles, you can export that automatically. So, often automated exports are a common reporting requirement. Push reporting, those automated notifications with details of data quality rule execution and results, that's often a requirement. Trend analysis, like we said, being able to show the improvement or degradation of data quality over time is fairly common. And often you need the ability to report on specific rules. So, for example, to take a simple one, if you have invalid phone formats or phone numbers that can't be automatically corrected, you might want to have a report specific to that shows the percentage of your data of your phone numbers that fall into that category and what those specific values are, so that, for example, you can go back into the source and correct that data manually. So that's another common requirement. And very frequently, and this can be a very valuable tool, is to integrate all of these different aspects of your data quality management process and solution into a single dashboard, so that you have a central place to look at your different trends and analysis, the different notifications that have been sent, and even the ability to drill down into specific rules and data sets. So that's often another valuable reporting requirement. MDM solutions can be complex, and no two are the same. MDM solutions will vary differently based on the domain that you're implementing. It will vary drastically based on the industry or vertical that you're implementing it for. But even if we're just talking about provider MDM in the healthcare space, MDM solutions can be very different. And there are a number of different MDM implementation styles in the marketplace that are essentially common patterns for implementing MDM, and they each address a different use case, and they have their different advantages and drawbacks. But the one that I want to focus on today is the coexistence style. This is the style that I think is best suited for provider MDM for most use cases. And to describe that style a little bit, MDM, number one, takes data from your operational systems, right? So in the diagram, the highlighted diagram there, you can see the bottom two data stores. Those represent your operational applications. And data is continuing to be consumed and managed within those applications. But we take that data into MDM, that dark gold data store in the center of the diagram. We consolidate it and we manage it there as well, right? So that's the key to the coexistence style. And not only do we manage it in that MDM database, we also publish it back to those operational systems. So let's give a real example here. So if we were to pull in data from your claims system and from your provider directory, if those represent the two systems at the bottom, we would pull that data and consolidate it within MDM and publish that high quality master data back to your operational systems. Often that's a critically important step for improving those processes that are related to those systems or are dependent upon those systems. And it really justifies the existence of MDM. Oftentimes, it's not enough to just have, this consolidated high-quality data set and use it to drive reports, which is kind of what we refer to as the consolidation style or an analytical usage. But you really need to leverage it across your enterprise. And so that is why this coexistence style, I think, is really the sweet spot for provider MDM. So diving into, I guess, more of a real life architecture a little bit more, this is what a provider MDM solution architecture at a high level might look like. At the top, you can see that you have your sources in gray. You have your provider directory system, your claims system. You have a couple of third-party sources, which may include CMS or CAQH or LexisNexis, for example. And you can have other web or public sources. But all of those sources are fed into a data integration and quality layer. And what that layer is responsible for is, number one, formatting the data in a consistent manner. So taking the disparate, different structures and formats, putting them into a conformed structure, and applying your data quality rules in terms of identifying invalid records or values, automatically cleansing and standardizing values where you can, and feeding that data into your master data management solution, which is towards the center of that diagram, the provider master data store. So once the data is in the provider master solution, you have a couple of processes that are feeding or are running on top of that system. First is the consolidation process, and that's the process of matching, merging, and surviving the data, right? That whole process of producing a golden record that we reviewed. So that runs at that layer. You also drive at the bottom or provide a stewardship interface that the outreach team can leverage to maintain that data over time. And shared responsibility with the provider master and the data quality layer, you'll have reports and metrics, right? So you'll be able to report on how many records you process in a day, how many data quality issues you encounter in a day, what the current snapshot or health of the data is within the provider master. Things of that nature would be driven by both the data integration layer and quality layer, as well as the provider master solution. As you can see as well in the upper left, we have members accessing the provider directory, and you'll also notice that the provider directory arrow between the data integration and quality layer goes two ways. So in this example, we're pulling data from the provider directory. We're also publishing it back to the provider directory so that your members, when they log on and they look for a new primary care doctor, for example, will be able to search and leverage that master data. In this example, we don't publish back to claims, but you very well could. And that's the whole point of that coexistence architectural style. Now, some of the advantages of this type of architecture and leveraging MDM to solve the provider data quality problem is that it supplies a long-term solution for managing provider data on an ongoing basis. So it gives you a flexible platform to onboard additional sources, consolidating those into a single version of the truth, and it enables integration of that master data with your provider directory or any other internal applications. The reporting and metrics component of it as well, I think, is one of the more important aspects of this type of architecture and an effective solution. And what it really drives is outreach prioritization, right? So for example, to improve the effectiveness of your outreach process, you might identify low quality or low confidence master records and put those to the top of the list or the top of the queue for your outreach team to call and validate. You can measure the improvement of your data quality over time, like we talked about, and you can even quantify your reduction in exposure to CMS fines, again, to really put some hard facts and figures around the effectiveness of the solution. So that is all of the content that we had for today. Thank you so much for your time and attendance. Normally, we take questions live over the webinar, but due to some technical difficulty that we've had, we're unable to do so. But if you do have any questions, feedback, or comments, please do send that in to us. You can submit those to afoster@datasourceconsulting.com. That's Allison Foster. She's our marketing coordinator and coordinates all of these webinars. And what we'll do is we'll consolidate the questions that we receive, we'll answer them and post an entry in our blog to get those answers out, and we'll send you that information. So again, hope this information was informative and useful, and again, would very much like to hear from you and any questions that you might have. Also, keep an eye out. Our next webinar is coming up on June 28th at 11 o'clock a.m. Mountain Time. Sally McCormack, our Competency Director for Data Quality, will be reviewing how to maximize the return on investment of data quality initiatives. Sally is extremely knowledgeable. It's going to be very interesting, and I highly recommend attending if you're able. And lastly, I wanted to provide my contact information. If you would like to reach out to me directly, please do. I would love to hear from you, either by email or by phone. Please feel free to reach out. And with that, we will wrap up the webinar. Thanks again for your time and attendance. Have a great day.